welcome to episode 6 of Mind the Gap this year, which is Varane Performance's podcast series where we talk to business and thought leaders focusing on the various gaps between where our businesses want to be and where they are as we emerge into what could be termed a post-pandemic world, or maybe it's a world in which we live with the pandemic. But I think what is true is that there are unprecedented challenges for nearly every business, which are new and changing on a daily basis. And so I'm Tom Holmes, founding director of Varane Performance. We're a technology agnostic consultancy that helps businesses solve their HR and finance problems. Digital transformation to the back office is really what we do. And today I'm delighted to be joined by David Joshua, a leadership development professional, a Penguin-based published author, and lecturer at Henley Business School. David and I will be discussing rediscovering our authenticity and how it translates into our world as HR and business leaders. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Tom. It's wonderful to be here with you.
So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Please remember to use the Q&A box to ask any questions. And of course, you can use the chat function as well if you want to. So please drop anything in as we go through. But first and foremost, David, it's great to see you this morning. And I really wanted to understand, you talk about authenticity an awful lot in your work and outside of work. And I wanted to ask you to tell us what authentic about yourself and what authenticity means to you. I seem to be struggling to get the words out today, but yes.
So it'll come some days, hey? So authenticity, well, first about me. So I left a successful career in finance in investments to move into leadership development. And I developed leaders' talent across 3 dimensions. The first is innovation. The second is communication and connection. And the third is persuasion, revenue generation. So to give an example, on Tuesday, I was with a financial services firm, helping them to do sales training, but sales training from a position of learning how to connect and to consult rather than simply pitch a product. Right? We want to understand people's needs, and we want to be authentic in the way we present ourselves, because people buy from people they know, like, and trust. And authenticity is about being known, liked, and trusted on an authentic level. You asked what authenticity means, and what's so interesting is it's derived from the same root as the word author, to author. So authenticity means to create our own narrative. And I think there are 2 elements of creating our own narrative. First, we have to understand and interpret and attribute meaning to the events that are happening to us. And second, we have to intelligibly translate them and express them to the world authentically, so that other people can learn from our experiences and the wisdom that we've accumulated.
So is it kind of like telling the truth? Is that a connected thing, or is it more complex than that?
Okay, it's so interesting, because the truth is subjective. In any situation, there are 3 perspectives to the truth. There's my truth, there's your truth, and then there's the absolute truth, which we never get to see, because truth is relative. As you know, when you've held a position strongly and then moved on in your life and realized that you no longer agree with old you. So the challenge with telling the truth is we have to first understand what our own truth is. And to do that, we have to have done the work to discover who we are and what we believe. And I think really in modern society, that's the element that's lacking, is people are struggling to know who to believe and what to believe in a world where they're bombarded by opinions. It's far easier to grab onto opinions than formulate your own.
I see. So I was just, as you were describing that, I was thinking back to exactly that situation where I held an opinion very strongly and believed it was the truth and told everybody that's exactly what it is and all that stuff, and then later found out that it was complete nonsense, and I was, misleading everybody. But I suppose I was being authentic, right? Because I was telling the truth as I saw it, and I was being authentic to my point of view at that time. But that's kind of a selfish thing. That's my point of view. I wasn't thinking, I didn't pay enough attention to other people's point of view, shall we say.
Okay, I mean, this is so deep, because our responsibility is to speak the truth as we see it, and we can't wait for a time when we know better, because that time never comes, right? We're never perfected. So you're absolutely right. We have an obligation, and it's not selfish, to tell the truth as we see it at that moment in time. But the paradox is, we also have an obligation to unlearn that truth and to evolve at the same time through what's broadly called self-development. So you're absolutely right. Being authentic is telling the truth as we see it. There's also an element of being humble enough to appreciate that our truth might not be is never the absolute truth. Truth is relative, but that also, as we progress in life, our authenticity should and can increase. And as it does, we get closer and closer to, moral, ethical alignment, where actually we are closer to what is the absolute truth rather than our relative opinion.
That's very interesting, because as people progress through their careers, a lot of people say that they learn how much they don't know as time goes on. And I guess what that means is, as a younger person, you're quite likely to take a position quite strongly. And then as an older person, you might go, well, guess what? I think it's like this, but I can't be sure. And that's kind of near the reality, I guess.
So I love what you just said there. We can forgive young people for holding strong opinions that are just wrong, because what do they know, right? And we were all that person once. What's more terrifying is once you start to meet leaders who are, and Carl Jung said most of his patients came to him at 38 years old. There seems to be something about that kind of age where you either have a midlife crisis or a midlife transformation. And the crisis comes when you don't let go of the control, the security, your truth. You want to be right, and being right is more important to you than finding out the truth. Now, if we want a midlife transformation, then we let go of being right and we start asking for the truth. And when you do this, something amazing happens. You realize that you're wrong about almost everything all of the time. And then you just allow things to, you accept things as they are. And as you accept things as they are, there's a real wonder and joy to it, because you're no longer trying to run around fixing things. You're actually just trying to work on yourself and your perception. And it's a far, far better way to live. And I think one of the blessings to come out of this pandemic is that people have started to A, go more into themselves, which we kind of touched on, but also B, they've realized that they can't control everything, and that actually having this ability to be flexible, adaptable, and agile is far more important than running around trying to control every single variable, which is technically impossible.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm very interested in the word authenticity, because, the words which we've been using to describe what is most important have kind of changed over time. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, etc., there was a lot of talk about resilience and words like that as people were going through what were, very difficult conditions in changing their world and all that. So resilience became a kind of key word. But now I see it as that I hear much more the word authenticity than I did pre the pandemic, and also words like compassion. And so I'm going to be discussing with an expert on compassion in a couple of weeks' time to discuss that word. But I'm really, authenticity, I think, is today's topic, and I'm really fascinated with these words which encapsulate how business is changing and developing. And I think, authenticity and compassion seem to me to be words which actually describe the way business is thinking at the moment and the way it's changing. Do you get that impression, David?
100%. I did sales training for a financial services company yesterday, 2 days ago, Tuesday. And we started off, we did an hour and a half on connection, on how to identify. I use a 4 archetype model: the Native Americans, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, Hippocrates, the 4 humors. It's very common across space and time. So we started off by just learning how to speak another person's language and identify their perception, rather than, so the first part of selling is connecting. If you don't know and like me and trust me, then you're not going to want to buy from me. So that in itself is indicative of, and the response from the audience was incredible. And then we did consulting, which is, I'm not going to tell you anything about me. I just want to learn about you. And in some ways that relates to compassion, because I want to understand your problems. I want to understand your frustrations and pains, because if I don't understand the problem, I don't have a solution, I have a product. And I don't teach people to even use that word, because we have solutions to problems when we're engaged in earning the right to make a recommendation, which is what sales really is. I want to come back to this word authenticity, because, you know, it's so interesting that you called this podcast Rediscovering Authenticity. So why would we call it, why is it rediscovering? And something very interesting happens in the human experience, and it's this. When a baby giraffe is born, the baby giraffe is born almost fully functioning. It can run immediately, right? We are helpless until the age of about 6 or 7 years old, more or less. The ancient Egyptians, the Jesuits, they had a saying, which was, give me the boy until he's 7 years old, and I will show you the man. And what that means is, we take until about 7 years old to build this computer, the intellect, the ego. And once you've done that, it's more or less fixed. And the way we build it is this. We have primary caregivers, and those primary caregivers teach us what way we should live based on conditional love. And the conditional love works like this. It's a little warmer over here when you do certain things or don't do certain things. And it's much colder when you act and behave in certain ways. And those ways are relatively arbitrary. I'll give you an example. The first lady I ever coached, she lived in rural South Africa. She worked for a major insurance company, and her job was going in and pitching to very, very senior executives, which was terrifying for her. And she said, David, let me tell you something about me. I was raised in rural South Africa by my grandparents, who taught me it was better to be seen and not heard. And now you're asking me to go in and do this thing where I pitch ideas. It's terrifying, and I'm not used to it because of my conditioning. So what I do as a leadership development consultant and as a coach and as a friend is help people, is disrupt the patterns that they've installed, largely up to 7 years old, because those patterns served you whenever you were with your primary caregivers, right? And then you leave home, let's call it 18 years old, and you assume the computer you built and the patterns it runs are good and they're valid. But actually, this process of unlearning is the process of rediscovering authenticity. If we can unlearn the default programs installed by us, by our primary caregivers, then we can start to simultaneously find authenticity and rediscover the joy that we left behind during childhood.
But David, how on earth do we do that? That sounds hard.
Do you know, it's not an option. Very few people even get the option to do this. So let's be clear. Anybody listening to this podcast almost definitely has this option. You know, I lived for 5.5 years in South Africa. Self-development. There's a lovely saying, you can't teach a starving man to fast. Right. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have security and all of these things, if you're working 3 jobs, then it's very, very difficult to do this. It can be done. But the way you do it is this. First of all, you need self-awareness. You need to know what patterns you're running. And the most tried and tested way of identifying patterns is to sit still with yourself during meditation. Mindfulness helps, but really meditation is where it's at. Because if we can just watch ourselves, we can start to understand we are not our thoughts, we are not our patterns, we are not even our feelings. And so the self-awareness to become what they call the witness, to look behind the thoughts, to see the thoughts arising and to not associate with them, that's something like what Buddha called nirvana. That's liberation. As soon as you realize that you're not the patterns that you installed, you know, against your will when you were too young to know what you were doing, you're not your thoughts that keep running through your head on a loop, and you're not even the feelings that get you down, then that first step is self-awareness. The second step, according to wisdom traditions, according to psychoanalysis, according to clinical literature, the second step after self-awareness is acceptance. We need to just be able to accept that we run faulty patterns and that we think things that don't serve us, and sometimes we feel low. And if we can do that, and by the way, most of the time when you are aware of something, you won't be able to accept it. It's perfectly valid. As long as you're doing the first step, the second step will come. And if we can accept it, then there's a third step. And the third step is a shift. right? If we can accept what's happening to us, then we get the opportunity to shift. If we keep resisting, what we resist persists. What we resist persists. What we repress depresses us. What we accept and what we express liberates us.
Very interesting, very interesting. I think I've got this kind of life cycle of employment thought in my mind. So I've been thinking about this for a while, but it's this kind of cycle of someone who is progressing in a firm. Okay. So when you first join as a graduate, then obviously you have no skills, no experience of anything like that. And all we all know these people, the graduate joiners, etc. And the only thing which they've got is, are they nice and nice to have around?
Yeah.
And that's what we trade on at that very early part of our career. It's kind of like, oh, can I help with this or that or the third thing? And it's like, well, actually, your help is probably going to be less than me doing it myself. Yeah. But some people. And when the right person says it in the right way, you kind of go, yes, of course, I'd love to show you how to do this, and it'd be great to have you as part of the team. And that's the start point. Then, as one progresses through one's career, one gets power, and you start managing a team. You start progressing your professional ability and all that. You start telling everybody what to do. And it's quite directive in that kind of mid-manager level. You're telling people to do this and that and the third thing, and you have absolute power as far as work power goes. Anyway, then as one's career, so if we assume somebody who really develops further, then and ends up, say, in a board position or something like that, those guys have no power again. They're almost back to the beginning, because you can influence your senior managers. You can kind of tell them what you want to happen, but you can't make it happen. It's more of an influencing and kind of, it's almost back to the beginning. And then when you look at, say, the chairperson or whatever of companies, they don't tell anybody what to do. They just make a few suggestions, useful comments and stuff like that. And they're almost the same person as they were when they were an 18-year-old influencing a group of people of which they have effectively no direct power. What do you think about that, David?
I love it. I love it. And there's a saying, what got you here won't get you there. And, what we're talking about is you acquire functional skills, hard skills, you make it to manager level. Let's talk about sales. You hit your numbers. Fantastic. Everybody loves you. And then all of a sudden, all of the things that got you to, let's call it a core leader, now we're asking you to be an executive. And it comes back to this unlearning. It comes back to the letting go of control. It's a completely different skill set. And so on the leadership journeys that I facilitate, what we're actually doing a lot of the time is helping people transform from functional into a leader who can, as you say, influence. And what's so fascinating and interesting about what you've said there is we're talking about influencing, which requires executive presence. And that's a nebulous term, but it's, it when you see it, a bit like the Supreme Court ruling on pornography, right? Hard to describe, but it when you feel it. I would say you feel it rather than see it. And it comes back to authenticity, because the people who are integrated, right? And integrated comes from the Latin. The root word is inter, which is to make whole, to be holistic. The word holy comes from whole as well. And the people who have done the work to become authentic, they are what I think it was Maslow would describe as self-actualized people. And they're people who are good in any situation because they've turned on the dormant parts of potential within them, and they know how they're going to respond in any given situation. They trust themselves. And because they trust themselves, we can trust them. The extent to which I can trust you is limited by the extent to which you can trust yourself. It's the same with value. The extent to which you value yourself is the cap on what I can value you. And we see this all the time in interviews and what have you. If people don't show up valuing themselves, very difficult for us to value them. So I love what you say about these stages of development and how, as I said, what got you here is not what gets you there.
It is quite interesting though, because in that now I think about that and what you just built on it, in that mid part of the career, then there are occasions where managers, etc., as a manager of a team, where actually being inauthentic, i.e. telling the team stuff which is not completely true, shall we say, is part of the job. Because, yes, yeah, if you took military examples or all sorts of things, there are occasions where that mid-manager has got to lead people into something which they know is not going to be everything which they're describing it to be. It is not going to be fantastically successful or whatever, and yet they are kind of doing it. And so there is a need for, in certain stages in one's career, to kind of turn down the button on the truth, turn down the knob on the truth. Isn't that, or is that not right?
So
does I guess the way I'm framing it is, does authenticity, is it universal to every stage in the career and every role, and how to work, and how do you manage a situation where one is being forced for whatever reason to basically say something which isn't quite right? Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't expressed it, but you know what I mean.
I do. And, I was fortunate enough to come across the work of Ray Dalio. He is the most successful hedge fund owner in the world ever, and he's also a wonderful human being. And he has this book called Principles, which I highly recommend everyone read if you haven't. Changed my life. And I hired and trained and led a sales team in South Africa, which comes with its own national sales team. Well, in South Africa, it's very, very diverse. And so you have a lot more going on across a lot more dimensions. And, one of his things is radical transparency. And there was a lot of flux going on. I didn't know a lot that was coming down the line. We just knew things were going down the line, restructuring, which is obviously terrifying for everybody and unsettling. And so I took Brené Brown wasn't really a big thing back then, but I took the what I'll call the Brené Brown line on it, as well as the Ray Dalio line. And I just practiced radical transparency. And as Brené Brown would say, it was really messy and they didn't like it. But I would say to them, the alternative is, I keep this from you. Would you rather that? And I think, giving people the option and saying, look, I don't know, I'm imperfect, I'm going to mess up, and we have a choice. I can either be direct with you with what I know, and I may be wrong and things may change, or I can close up shop and, command and control. You mentioned the military. I can just tell you what I want to tell you, and then you're just going to deal with it. And, I think I know the team, they found it really difficult, but they had to deal with that in their own way. It wasn't for me to deal. I wasn't trying to take their uncertainty away. I was telling them there was uncertainty, and that was their medicine to deal with. That was their work. So what's so interesting is I think we're moving into a new paradigm where actually authenticity, and Brené Brown has been a huge catalyst for this. Authenticity isn't just a nice to have some of the time. It's actually the only way to live and the only way to work. And the reason for that is, I remember listening to Jordan Peterson once, and he's a clinical psychologist who's seen thousands of patients over 30 years. He said he never once saw anybody not get what they deserve in its clinical practice. Once you went back, they would find a moment where they had lied to themselves or other people, they'd been dishonest, they'd acted unethically, and that had created a ripple in the fabric of space-time. And when it uncrinkles, it hurts, right? And I know that. And so now I don't lie, right? I try and tell the truth, but I definitely don't lie, because I know those lies come back to you. And I think it's the same in the corporate environment. I'm not saying we always have to tell the truth, but we certainly can never afford to lie, because for our own integrity, for our own authenticity, and our own well-being, both mentally and sequentially as we go through life, it's just bad strategy.
So that's a practical tip to support us in discovering our authentic selves. Have you got other practical things we should be doing and thinking about on a daily basis to help our journeys to being more authentic to ourselves and to others?
Okay, wonderful question. Look, I think the first thing is, do you really want to know? Right. So the first thing I'll ask, coaching or a friend, because if people don't want to know, if people, Carl Jung said people will do almost anything to avoid facing their soul. And it's so true, right? People don't want to sit with themselves. The answer to almost every question, it appears through the great literature and the latest clinical psychological research, is go meditate, go sit with yourself. But people aren't willing to do it because it's really painful. It's really painful because it's a phoenix-like process. The phoenix is the myth of the bird that every 100 years burns itself, self-immolates, like those monks did in Vietnam. They set themselves on fire for something they believe in because the truth is more important to them than holding on to the faulty, decayed knowledge that they've acquired, right? Being right. So the first thing is learn to sit with yourself, which will really help with being self-aware, and it'll show you your faulty patterns. If you can become aware of the patterns, you can fix them. If you never want to go in there, then you're never going to get out of it, and then you're going to keep running the patterns, and life gets worse because the patterns become less and less optimal. But other than that, I think the other great thing that we can do, as well as, asking ourselves, am I happy with where I am, or do I really want to know, and do I really want to fix it? And if you answer yes to that question, I promise you, sit on the edge of your bed for 30 seconds, and the answer to what you need to do will come to you in no time at all. And if you just do that one thing, you will be working your way towards authenticity. And that level of self-truth is the path to authenticity.
Wow. I'm assuming that this isn't simply kind of formal meditation. It's informal meditation and thought as well.
So, I have a formal meditation practice and gratitude practice, which here's something really interesting. Again, Brené Brown, she'd never in all of her clinical research met a single person who would describe their life as joyful, regardless of external circumstances. That's about 20% of the population, by the way, who did not have a daily formal gratitude practice. So just think about that. If you do not have a daily gratitude practice and your life is not joyful, then it's very difficult for you to expect that outcome. So why do I mention this? So mindfulness is great. I think a formal meditation practice is even better because it's the root of mindfulness. But as you say, what we want to do, what the literature tells us to do, clinical psychology as well as wisdom, is disassociate and watch ourselves. And if you can start watching what you do and not blame, not attribute any emotion to it, and just go, that's who I really am. That clarity of perception is what enables us to start cleaning up the patterns. And if you like, defrag this computer that we built at 7 years old, that we're still running decades later.
Wow. And yes, I'm now coming back to your practice this week with the financial services, sales teams and all that. How did they watch your messages, David? Were they a bit surprised when you told them exactly what you just told us?
So I call what I do Trojan horsing. I teach at Henley too. And so look, I teach to the head, but learning, what the whole point of a learning experience is to make people feel something so they do something. And my biggest hang up with the learning industry is it's infotainment that is designed just to give to fill time. And I only work on outcomes and objectives, and I want people to feel something so they do something. And every time I do a single module, a single session, there's action learning at the end. So I'll tell you how we ended our time together. We ended with a 1 minute this is in sales training. We ended with a 1 minute gratitude meditation for the reasons I've just outlined. And, the way I told them was, if you want to be an active listener, if you want to go into something, I also train peak performance as a coach. If you want to be in peak performance when you go into these meetings, you need to access that flow state. And a 1 minute gratitude meditation is the most effective way to get there. And I can tell you that I think it's so refreshing for people coming into this, as you've described it, post-pandemic world, to see that actually connection and joy are part of the everyday experience, or can be part of the everyday experience. And not only that, they make us way more effective. I would way more want to buy from somebody who had an aura of joy and connectivity about them than somebody who simply wanted to sell me a product.
So, David, some of our audience don't know what a 1 minute gratitude practice is. What is a 1 minute daily gratitude practice, and how do we do it?
Okay, well, I think we're coming maybe towards the end of our time, so it might be a really beautiful moment to do this. So yes. We're just gonna do this for 30 seconds because I appreciate dead noise. But what I'm going to ask you to do is just put your feet firmly on the floor, straighten your back, shoulders out, head up, chest open. Close your eyes for me. And I want you to put your hand over your heart. And I want you to breathe into the space between your hand and your heart. I want you to send your energy there, your intention, your awareness, your breath. Big, deep breaths. And I want you to think of something that you're grateful for. Think of something that you're grateful for. Could be somebody, something, could be the wind on your face, the sunlight on your skin. And I want you to feel that gratitude while keeping the attention and awareness and breath on the space between your hand and your heart. I've started the timer. We're just going to sit here for a few more seconds. You may feel other sensations, thoughts, emotions arise. Accept them. And then return your breath and your awareness to the space between your hand and your heart and feel gratitude. Okay, and now just keep your eyes closed, roll your neck, stretch your arms, honor your body, and just ask yourself, do I feel more content, calmer, in a better place to go into a moment that matters, like a family situation, a difficult conversation? And that simple practice, 1 minute, there are 1,440 minutes a day. We just did that for 30 seconds. And if you do that, according to the research of Brené Brown, the chances of you living a joy-filled life, regardless of external circumstances, rise exponentially.
Amazing, David. I love it. What a surprise. I wasn't expecting that at all, but I'm delighted we did that. That is really fascinating and useful. And yes, I do feel more content and happy after that. I'm not sure if I'm more authentic than I was, but excellent. Well, now that's kind of put me slightly off my script and my thought process. So
good.
So that is your top tip as the single thing which we should be thinking about and doing every single day to make a big difference to ourselves and presumably those around us.
I think if every world leader, if every employee, if every person focused on doing that, the world would be a different place instantly.
Wow, that's amazing, David. Well, David is available for bar mitzvahs, parties, and other and joint meditation sessions. So I would like to, David, that was a really great session today. Thank you very much. I don't think we can top that last 5 minutes of the talk. That was absolutely fantastic and a first for any of our conversations. I've seen that the chat is saying how wonderful that felt too. So I'd like to thank you for attending. Thank you very much for taking. I would like to thank our audience as well for joining us this morning. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I hope that was useful. As I said, we'll be talking about compassion and that word and how that's and trying to unpack compassion in business. In fact, we're calling the next one the business case for compassion. So I'm very excited about that, and I think it will make a perfect series for this authenticity one. So thank you very much, David. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I would love to meet you there. And if you're interested in leadership development programs, coaching, training, I would also love to hear from you. Thank you, Tom, and thank you for Varan. I've really, really enjoyed our time together.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and week.
Goodbye.